A 24-year-old woman spent 2 winters sleeping in a drainage pipe in Oklahoma City. She spent $25 total. She slept warmer than people in shelters costing $7,000 a year. This is not a story about survival. It's a story about what we refuse to see. Like and subscribe if that sentence made you stop. There is a specific kind of quiet that comes the morning your key stops working. Not a dramatic quiet. Not the silence after a fight or the held breath before bad news. Just the ordinary Tuesday morning quiet of a hallway in an apartment building on SW 15th Street in Oklahoma City, where a 24-year-old woman named Devin Calloway stood in her socks with a paper coffee cup in one hand and her key in the other, pressing it into the lock the way you press it when you know it isn't going to turn, but you press it anyway because the alternative is standing there admitting that it won't. The key did not turn. She pressed it again. Then she set the coffee cup on the floor, used both hands, and pressed it a third time. Nothing. The landlord had rekeyed the lock sometime between midnight and 7 in the morning, which Devin did not know was illegal in Oklahoma, regardless of how far behind on rent a tenant had fallen. The proper process being an eviction filing through the courts that could take weeks, a process the landlord had skipped entirely. She knew she was behind. She had been watching the number the way you watch a bruise, checking it every few days to see if it had gotten worse. It had gotten worse. The number was not large in any absolute sense. The total she owed, including late fees, was $860. The amount in her checking account that morning was $41 and some cents. The gap between those two numbers was not a canyon. It was not the result of catastrophe. It was the result of a series of amounts between $200 and $400 that had come due in the wrong order over the previous 6 weeks. Starting with the electric bill that Tyler had been supposed to pay before he left and ending with a parking ticket she'd gotten the week before that felt, at the time, almost funny. Tyler had been her boyfriend for 2 years. They had moved to Oklahoma City together from eastern Kentucky when she was 20. Him chasing a construction job that materialized and then didn't, her following because she was 20 and in love, and because there was nothing holding her to Harlan County except her mother, who had her own problems. When the construction work dried up, Tyler started staying out late and coming home quiet, and then one morning in March of 2023, he was simply gone. His clothes, his tools, his truck. He left the apartment key on the kitchen counter next to a half-finished bottle of hot sauce, and a note that said sorry and nothing else. Devane had read the note several times looking for more, and there was no more. She was 22 years old, and she was in a city she hadn't grown up in, with a lease in both their names and a bank account that had been running on Tyler's income more than she had ever fully admitted to herself. She spent the first week after he left convinced she could fix it. She picked up extra shifts at the coffee shop on Classen where she'd been working part-time. She sold her laptop. She called the landlord twice and left messages that were not returned. The arithmetic did not improve. The numbers moved in one direction regardless of what she did, the way water moves toward a drain. She was not an addict. She did not have an untreated mental illness. She was not fleeing anything except a lease she could no longer cover in a city where the average one-bedroom had gone up $200 a year for 3 consecutive years. None of that fit the story people tell themselves about how someone ends up standing in a hallway in their socks at 7 in the morning holding a key that no longer opens anything. The Classen Boulevard Women's Shelter had 42 beds and an intake window that opened at 5 in the afternoon and closed when the beds filled, which on cold nights in October meant the window closed by 6:15. Devin got there at 5:50 on her first night, after spending 3 days sleeping in the laundromat on NW 23rd that stayed open until 11 and didn't ask questions if you sat in the corner with a bag. The intake worker was a woman named Paula who processed Devin's information with the particular efficiency of someone who has asked the same questions so many times the questions no longer have weight. Name, date of birth. Do you have any current medications? Have you been diagnosed with any mental health conditions? Do you feel safe? Devine said yes to that last one, even though safe was not exactly the word she would have chosen, and Paula wrote it down and handed her a sheet of rules. The rules were specific. Lights out at 10. No food in the sleeping area. Personal items must be stored in the provided locker, the locker being a metal box approximately the size of a hotel safe that was too small for her backpack and her sleeping bag both. She had to choose. She left the sleeping bag on the shelf above the locker and hoped it would be there in the morning. It was the first morning. The rule that Devin had not focused on during intake was the departure rule. Residents were required to leave the building by 7 in the morning and were not permitted to return before 5 in the afternoon. 10 hours. 10 hours every day in which she had to be somewhere that was not the shelter, regardless of weather, regardless of whether she had work, regardless of whether it was the kind of January morning in Oklahoma City, where the wind off the plains hits you between buildings and takes your breath in a way that feels less like cold and more like a warning. She learned the public spaces quickly, the way all unhoused people learn them, by necessity and by process of elimination. The library on NW 10th opened at 9 and allowed her to sit until 5 as long as she did not sleep visibly, which she learned to avoid by sitting upright and keeping her eyes open enough that from a distance she appeared to be reading. McDonald's on Reno Avenue was reliable until the lunch rush, when the manager would begin making slow circuits of the dining room in the manner of someone who was not asking you to leave, but was making it clear that leaving would be preferred. The Quick Trip on Western had the warmest lobby and the least hostile staff and cost 79 cents to maintain your presence with a small coffee. She was managing. Then on the 16th day, she reached into her bag for her wallet and the smaller zippered pouch that held her ID. Her Social Security card and her Medicaid card was not there. She turned the bag out on a table in the shelter common area, twice, 3 times, pressing her hands flat against the bag lining to feel for something that was not there. The pouch was gone. She retraced the day in her head. Library, McDonald's, Quick Trip, shelter intake. Someone had not stolen it. She had set it down somewhere and someone had picked it up or moved it and it was gone. Without ID, she could not apply for the warehouse job she had been preparing to interview for. Without her Medicaid card, she could not refill the prescription she had been mostly ignoring. Without documents, she was less than a name. She sat in the shelter common room at 9:15 at night under the fluorescent lights and understood something she had not fully understood before, that the shelter was not a place where you stabilized. It was a place where you were exposed to the maximum number of ways to lose what little you had left, and that the people who designed it had never once tried to live inside it. Ray Tillman worked the loading dock at a restaurant supply company on SW 29th and had known Devine from her first week in Oklahoma City when they'd both been hired by the same temp agency and spent 3 days moving industrial refrigerator units in 90-degree August heat. He was 31, drove a Ford Ranger with a cracked dashboard and a back seat that folded flat, and when Devin called him from outside the shelter on a Tuesday night in early November and told him what had happened, he said, "Drive me your location," and came and got her without asking her to explain more than she already had. The arrangement was never stated directly. She slept in the back seat of the Ranger. Ray parked it in the lot behind his apartment building and left the key under the driver's visor and texted her a code for the building's bathroom door that was wedged open after 11. She was out of the lot before 7 each morning before the building manager did his walk. She kept her things in the truck bed under a tarp. Ray brought her coffee sometimes when he left for work, and they did not talk about the situation as a situation because naming it would have made it into something that required a decision, and neither of them wanted to make a decision. She was warm. She could lock the doors. She could stretch flat. She could lie in the back of that truck on a cold night with the windows fogged and feel, for the first time in weeks, that her body was hers again. There is a specific quality to sleeping in a locked vehicle that shelters cannot replicate, which is that your perimeter is defined. You know where you end and where the outside begins. Cardboard walls don't give you that. Nylon tents don't give you that. A locked door, even a truck door with a broken rear window seal, tells the part of your nervous system that never fully sleeps that it can let go for a few hours. She tried to be useful. She started doing small jobs through a woman named Sharonda at the Day Center on Sheridan Avenue, who had a network of people who needed cleaning work and painting and moving help, paid in cash, reliable enough that Devin could count on $50 to $80 a week. She was not saving herself. She was treading water. She knew the difference. Ray called her on a Thursday afternoon in February and said it in the way people say hard things when they've been thinking about how to say them for too long. He was taking a job in Amarillo, starting in 2 weeks. He was sorry. She said she was happy for him, and she meant it completely. And she stood outside the coffee shop where she'd taken the call and looked at the street for a while without going anywhere. The truck left in March, and Devin stood in the parking lot behind Ray's former apartment building on a Tuesday morning with her bag and her sleeping bag and no car to sit in, and understood that she had spent 4 months being kept warm by someone else's kindness and had not learned how to keep herself warm at all. The tent came from a church group that did Saturday outreach on NW 23rd The kind of outreach where volunteers in matching yellow t-shirts carried bottled water and granola bars in wagons and tried to make eye contact with people who had learned to avoid eye contact. Divine did not avoid eye contact. She was 23 and still believed that being direct was a functional strategy. A woman named Greta, with a clipboard and a patient face, asked what she needed most, and Devin said shelter. And Greta wrote something down and came back the following: Saturday with a two-person Coleman dome tent in a compression bag, green nylon, fiberglass poles, a rainfly that attached with clips. Devin had it set up in 20 minutes in the tree line along the south bank of Lake Overholser. Back from the main trail, behind a stand of eastern red cedars that screened it from the path. The first night she lay inside the zip tent, with the rainfly fully attached, and felt something she had not felt in months, which was enclosed. The rainfly extended 12 inches past the door and made a small vestibule where she put her boots and her bag, and the interior smelled like nylon and cedar and her own breath, and the walls were close enough that she could feel them without reaching, and the closeness felt like company. She told herself it was enough. It was not enough. Single-wall nylon has an R value close to 0, which is a way of saying a tent is a windbreak, and nothing more. On nights above 40 degrees, this distinction does not matter much. Your body generates heat. The tent traps a pocket of warmer air around you. Your sleeping bag does most of the work. She was managing. Then November arrived, and Oklahoma City got cold the way it gets cold on the plains. Not gradually, but suddenly. A front moving through overnight and temperature dropping 15 degrees between 10 at night and 3 in the morning. The first hard freeze of that winter. The thermometer on her phone read 12 degrees when she woke up at 3:15, shivering in every muscle. She was wearing 3 layers on top and 2 pairs of leggings, and her wool hat pulled over her ears, and the gloves from the Salvation Army box with the worn-through thumb on the left hand, and she was shivering anyway, the kind of shivering that is not uncomfortable but is your body making decisions on your behalf about how to allocate heat, and the decision your body makes is to stop sending it to your hands and feet and concentrate it at your core. Her feet went numb around 3:30. She lay in the sleeping bag and thought about the shelter, and calculated the walk and the temperature and the probability that there was a bed available, and decided the calculation was too uncertain. She thought about Ray and Amarillo and the truck. She thought about her mother in Harlan County. Then she stopped thinking about things she couldn't use and started thinking about the problem in front of her. The problem was not that she was cold. The problem was that she was losing heat faster than she could make it. She would not understand the physics of this until much later. That night she understood it the way your body understands it, without language, as a fact. 7 nights in a row that winter dropped below 10 degrees. On the coldest night, -4 with a wind chill of -13, the zipper on her sleeping bag caught halfway up the track and would not move in either direction. Her fingers were too cold to grip the pull tab. She switched to her teeth and worked it for 22 minutes before the zipper gave. She lay there after, breathing hard, and made a decision the way you make decisions at -4 in the dark, which is not carefully but completely. She was going to find something different. She did not know yet what different looked like. She was not looking for a home on the afternoon she found the pipe. She was looking for a roof. There is a difference. A roof is something immediate, a solution to the problem of rain that is falling right now, at this moment, on the back of your neck and down inside your collar, and soaking through the top layer of your sleeping bag, which you are carrying, because you have learned to carry it everywhere since the night it was moved from the shelf above your shelter locker to the shelf below, and you found it wet from a leaking ceiling pipe that no one had repaired. It was a Tuesday in early July, odd weather for Oklahoma City, a cold front dropping unseasonable rain, and Devin was cutting through the chain link gap on the south side of a stalled commercial development near SW 15th and Western, a half-built warehouse project that had stopped when the developer lost financing in 2021 and had been sitting behind bent fence ever since. She had used this path before. It was a shortcut to the library, but the rain was picking up and she ducked toward the first overhang she could see, which was a corrugated metal lean-to over a stack of drainage materials at the east edge of the property. Under the lean-to, in a drainage easement cut into the dirt, lay a pipe, HDPE, black corrugated exterior, smooth white interior, 48 inches in diameter, 18 feet long. She crouched under the lean-to and looked at it and kept looking at it, because there was nothing else to do with rain coming down on 3 sides. Then she did what anyone does when they see an opening large enough to enter. She entered it. She crawled in on her hands and knees, turned onto her side, and found that lying flat, she had perhaps 4 inches of clearance above her, the curved wall close enough on either side that she could feel it without stretching her arms. The rain sound dampened immediately. Traffic noise from Western Avenue, a block away, reduced to a low hum. The interior was dry, smooth, and closed. She stretched out flat and put her hands at her sides, and her fingertips did not reach the walls. She looked up at the curved white surface 4 or 5 inches above her face. She breathed. She did not plan to sleep. She closed her eyes for what she thought was 10 minutes, and woke up 3 hours later in the dark with the rain gone and something she had not felt in so long she did not recognize it at first, which was warmth. Not the warmth of a building or a sleeping bag or a body held close to another body. The warmth of a space that had held still around her. She sat up in the dark, completely still, and thought, if I sealed the ends, that was the whole thought, if I sealed the ends. She reached out and touched the corrugated wall and felt the ridges and valleys of it, the regular pattern of a surface that was not designed to be a wall, but was performing as one anyway. Then she pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight and looked at the opening from the inside. The diameter of the pipe meant each opening was roughly 12 square feet of exposure to outside air. She needed to close that exposure. She did not yet know how. She knew she would figure it out. She picked up her bag, crawled to the door end, and squeezed out into the night. It had stopped raining. The air was cool and still. She stood for a moment in the drainage ditch and looked back at the pipe, the way you look at something you've decided to return to. Then she noticed something she had not noticed when she crawled in. Someone had left a piece of corrugated cardboard wedged against the interior wall near the door end. On it, written in pencil and handwriting that had the careful quality of someone not used to writing. Seal both ends, warm up fast. Been here 8 months. Good luck. M. She read it twice. She did not know who M was. She folded the cardboard carefully with the message facing in and put it in the outer pocket of her bag. She has never thrown it away. The summer she was 18, Divine Calloway worked 4 months at a building supply store in Harlan County, Kentucky, stacking freight and running the forklift and learning, by proximity to the people who came in to buy things, the vocabulary of construction. She learned what XPS meant: extruded polystyrene, pink boards usually, or sometimes blue depending on the manufacturer, stacked in the insulation aisle behind the drywall. She learned what R value meant, not the formula, just the practical version: higher number, slower heat transfer, better insulation. She learned that the pink stuff doesn't absorb water, that you can leave it outside in rain and it doesn't change, that it's different from the white expanded stuff that crumbles if you look at it wrong. She learned this because a customer named Gerald had explained it to her once while she was helping him load sheets into his truck bed. And she had listened because Gerald was the kind of person who explained things as if the information belonged to everyone and not just to people who had use for it right now. She had not thought about any of this for 6 years. She thought about it now. She spent 3 days checking construction dumpsters along the SW 29th corridor before she found what she needed. Behind a house renovation on SW 61st Street, a stack of broken XPS sheets in a roll-off container, pink, 1-inch thick, R5, mostly in pieces but 2 pieces large enough to be worth something. She balanced them on her head, one at a time, and walked them back to the pipe, 1.5 miles each way, which took the better part of an afternoon. On the walk back with the second piece, she passed a man in a work vest eating lunch on a concrete barrier at a job site on SW 44th. His name, she would learn later, was Calvin. He watched her approach with the foam sheet balanced on her head and said nothing until she was about to pass, and then he said, "What are you building?" She stopped. She told him with more directness than she had told anyone anything in months, exactly what she was building and why and where. Calvin listened without changing his expression. He finished his sandwich. Then he stood up and said, "Follow me," and walked her to a construction container at the back of the site and pointed to 3 full sheets of XPS, unbroken, stacked against the back wall. They were offcuts from a foundation job, he said. They were going to the dumpster. He picked up 2 of them and handed them to her, took the third himself, and walked them to the street where she was standing. He set his sheet against hers and looked at her for a moment and said, "I didn't see anything," and went back to his lunch. She stood on the sidewalk on SW 44th with 3 full sheets of R5 foam and felt something she could not immediately name, which was the specific feeling of being treated as a person by someone who had no obligation to do so and nothing to gain from it, and how that feeling, when you have gone long enough without it, lands somewhere deeper than gratitude. The cooking thermometer cost $1.50 at a Goodwill on S. Western Avenue, a metal probe on a 2-foot wire with a dial face, the kind used for checking the internal temperature of roasts. Divine bought it on a Thursday in October because she needed to know. Not to know that she was warm. She could feel that. She needed to know by how much and under what conditions, and whether the improvements she was making were making the difference she thought they were making, or whether the warmth was wishful thinking made physical by exhaustion and the desire to believe she had solved something. The notebook cost $1 at Dollar Tree. It was 70 pages, wide-ruled, with a cover that said notes in block letters and nothing else. She started filling it the first cold night of autumn 2024, sitting cross-legged in the sealed pipe, with the foam end caps wedged tight, and the pool noodle strips she'd read about on a Reddit forum post from 2019 pressed into the corrugated valleys and taped over with duct tape. The pool noodles had been Devon's own version of a fix she'd found in an archive thread on r.atlas, posted by a user whose account no longer existed, explaining how foam tubes cut lengthwise fit into corrugated surfaces the way fingers fit between other fingers. She had sat in the library on N/10th on a public computer with 45 minutes of access time and read the thread twice, memorizing the relevant details the way you memorize things when you can't take notes because the computer doesn't have a printer and your phone battery is at 11%. That night, November 3rd, 2024, outside temperature 31 degrees Fahrenheit. She put the probe in the center of the pipe, waited for the dial to stop moving, and wrote Nav 3, out 31F, in 52F at 9 p.m., 59F at 11:30 p.m., slept. The next night, Nav 4, out 28F, wind, pool noodle seal holding. In 49F at 9:15, 57F at midnight, small cold draft left upper corner retaped. The notebook became the record of a 2-year experiment that no one had commissioned, and no one had asked for, conducted by a 24-year-old woman with a $1.50 thermometer in a drainage pipe on a construction site in Oklahoma City. She added the second sleeping bag in November, not nested inside the first the way most people would, but laid flat beneath her as a ground pad, the logic being that body weight compresses the loft on the underside of a sleeping bag, and a sleeping bag rated to 20 degrees might give you R2 on the bottom when you're lying on it, but R7 on top where it isn't compressed. She started going to the McDonald's on SW 29th at 9 each evening and filling a 32-ounce water bottle from the hot tap in the restroom and wrapping it in a wool sock and placing it against her core before sleep. The notebook recorded what she noticed, Jan 9. Hot bottle lasted until approx 3 a.m. by feel. Back section holding 54F at 1 a.m. Slept through. She wrote it all down not knowing who would ever read it. She wrote it down because she needed the numbers to be real somewhere outside of her own head. And because something in her understood, without articulating it, that what she was learning had value that extended beyond her own survival. Derek Wills had graduated from Oklahoma State with a civil engineering degree in May 2024, which meant he had been in the field for 8 months when his firm assigned him to the site survey for the redevelopment of the SW 15th and Western property, a preliminary inspection to assess existing drainage infrastructure before the new permits were filed. He was 29, which was young for a site engineer but not unusually young, and he had the quality common to people recently out of school, of believing that what he had been taught described the actual world with reasonable accuracy. He found the pipe on a Tuesday morning in February 2025, which was a cold morning, 34 degrees, and a low gray sky. He was doing a walk of the drainage easement with a clipboard and a measuring tape, noting infrastructure locations, and he almost missed the sealed end of the pipe, because from outside, it looked like a section of drainage that had been prepped for burial. The foam end cap flush, and the whole thing sitting low in the ditch. He looked at it for a moment. The seal was too careful to be incidental. He crouched, pulled the foam cap loose, and looked inside with his flashlight. Inside was a piece of carpet cut to fit the curved floor, a milk crate, an LED lantern, 2 sleeping bags, a shower curtain hung across the interior 2/3 of the way back, and resting on the milk crate, a notebook with a blue cover that said notes. He picked it up. He told himself later that he picked it up to determine whether it belonged to someone currently using the space. He opened to the first page and read the entry dated November 3rd, 2024. Then he read November 4th. Then he kept reading. He sat in the entrance of the pipe, with the cold coming up from the ditch, and read 70 pages of temperature records and small observations, and single-sentence notes that, together formed something he had no word for. Not a journal exactly, not a research document. Something between the two. The record of a person applying systematic attention to a problem under conditions that made systematic attention nearly impossible. He read an entry from January that said, 9F outside. Wind. Bottle lasted to 4 a.m. 52F in back section at midnight. Cold in shoulders. Slept well enough. Calvin would think this is funny. He did not know who Calvin was. He sat in the entrance of that pipe for 22 minutes. When he stood up, he felt the particular discomfort of someone whose understanding of a situation has changed faster than his feelings about it have caught up. He walked back to his truck and sat in it for a while with the heater running. Then, he called the site manager and said he had found evidence of current habitation in the drainage infrastructure, that the occupant appeared to have been there for an extended period, and that he wanted to flag it before filing the clearance report, because there were protocols for occupied structures that the firm's liability insurance required him to follow. The site manager said he'd check with legal and get back to him. Derek said he'd need 48 hours minimum. Then he drove to a Holiday Inn Express on I-40 and paid for a week out of his own checking account, $112 a night, and hoped that the protocols he'd invented on the phone would take at least that long to unravel. That afternoon, Derek went back to the pipe and sat on the ground near the entrance and waited. Vine came back at dusk with a bag from the Dollar General and found him there and stopped 12 feet away and looked at him. He said, "I read your notebook." She said, "That's mine." He said, "I know. I'm sorry." He held it out. She came forward and took it. He said, "I need to start clearing this site Thursday, but I booked you a room at the Holiday Inn on I-40 for a week. And here's the key, and I didn't tell my company, and you don't owe me anything." She looked at the key card in his hand and then at his face to determine what the key card cost. She had learned to make this assessment quickly. She saw that it cost him nothing except money, and that there was no transaction being proposed. She took the key card. She said, "Why?" He said, "Because I read your notebook, and you don't deserve to be evicted in one day." She said, "Okay." She put the key in her pocket and walked past him into the pipe and began folding her sleeping bags. He stood at the entrance with his clipboard and his measuring tape and watched her work and did not say anything else, because there was nothing else that needed to be said. The Holiday Inn room had a bed with 4 pillows and a bathroom with a door that locked from the inside and a television Devin turned on once and then turned off because the sound of it felt wrong in a way she couldn't explain. She slept for 14 hours the first night, not because she was unusually exhausted, but because the absence of vigilance has a weight of its own, and when it lifts it takes something with it, and what it takes requires time to replace. She spent 4 of her 7 days making calls she had been putting off for months. The Oklahoma City Housing Authority. The Section 8 waitlist. A caseworker at the day center on Sheridan who told her the waitlist was running 2 to 3 years, and that she had been added 14 months ago, and that her position was approximately 18 months from the top. She thanked the caseworker and sat on the hotel bed for a while thinking about the arithmetic of 18 months. And what 18 months required and what she had available to fill it with. On the 5th day, she got a text from a number she didn't recognize that turned out to be Lorene Thatch, the woman who had taught her 10th grade English in Harlan County and sent her $80 through Venmo 2 years ago without explanation. Lorene was in Oklahoma City for a literacy conference and had been thinking about Devin and wanted to know how she was. Devin sat with the text for 2 hours before responding. She typed "fine" and deleted it. She typed "things are complicated" and deleted that too. She typed "I'm in a hotel this week because I've been living in a pipe for 2 years and I'd like to get coffee if you have time." They met at a diner on NW 23rd the following morning. Lorene was 56, small and deliberate, with reading glasses on a chain and the quality of attention common to good teachers, which is that she looked at you as if you were the only scheduled event of her day. Divine told her everything. Not the version you tell people to make them feel comfortable, the edited version where the difficult parts are smoothed over and the ending is implied to be closer than it is. The full version. The tarps, the tent, the zipper in the dark at -4, the pipe, the notebook, the XPS foam, the pool noodles, Calvin, the hot water bottle, Derek. Lorene listened for 2 hours without interrupting. When Devin finished, Lorene picked up her coffee cup and looked at it and said, "I've been teaching for 28 years. I don't know how to teach what you just told me." Divine found the second pipe 6 days later, off SE 59th Street near the industrial corridor between the railroad tracks and the eastern edge of a stalled warehouse project. A 36-inch diameter HDPE, 12 inches narrower than the first, 15 feet long. Smaller volume, faster to heat, more condensation. A problem she managed with a small gap in the door end cap held open with a wadded sock. She sealed it the same way. Pool noodles, XPS duct tape shower curtain partition. New carpet from a curbside remodel on SE 44th. New notebook. First entry March 14, 2025, out 38F. In 61F by 10:30 p.m. Smaller, warmer, faster, still here. Derek Wills forwarded the notebook to his colleague at a nonprofit called Ground Level OKC that worked on transitional shelter design for unsheltered populations in the Southern Plains region. He forwarded it in April 2025, 6 weeks after the site clearance, with a note that said, "I think you should read this," and a second note that said, "I am not sharing this without the author's permission, so I'd like to get her contact information to you only if she agrees." Devon agreed. The director of Ground Level, a woman named Anise Beaumont, called her on a Thursday afternoon from a number with an OKC area code and introduced herself and said she had read the notebook twice and had shared it with a structural thermal engineer and a materials researcher at OU, and that all three of them had the same response, which was that the data was real and the methodology was valid, and the findings were something that years of simulation and modeling had not produced, because simulation and modeling happened in offices, and what Devon had recorded happened in actual weather at actual temperatures in an actual uninsulated pipe in a drainage easement on SW 15th Street in Oklahoma City. She said the organization was in early development on a low-cost modular shelter prototype, something that could be deployed rapidly in urban environments without permits or foundations, and that the core challenge was thermal containment in small volumes under wind load, which was exactly the problem Devon had solved empirically over 2 years of trial and error. She asked if Devon would be interested in a paid consulting engagement, not a grant, not a stipend, a consulting fee billed quarterly for her participation in the design process as a technical advisor with lived expertise. Devon sat in the 36-inch pipe on SE 59th with the phone against her ear and the thermometer on the milk crate, reading 59 degrees in late April, and said she'd think about it. Anise said, "Of course, take your time." Devon said, "One question." Anise said, "Yes." Devon said, "What do you do with what I tell you?" Anise said, "We build something that works." Devine did not respond to the email that week. She wrote in her notebook instead, an entry that was different from the other entries in that it was not a record of temperature or wind or condensation, but a record of something harder to measure. April 24. Derek read the notebook. Anise read the notebook. Calvin handed me phone because he saw what I was doing. Lorene listened. 4 people in 2 years who looked at what I was actually doing instead of what they assumed I was. That's the number. 4. She looked at the vein of ink on her left wrist, the words still here in the uneven hand of a 17-year-old who had been in trouble she couldn't name and needed to put something permanent on her body to prove she had made it through. She had not known what she was making it through to. She was starting to think she might find out. The development site on SE 59th had not broken ground. Her position on the Section 8 waitlist was approximately 14 months from the top. She had $23 in her account, and a consulting email she had not answered, and a notebook with 40 new pages of data and a pipe she had sealed, with foam and pool noodles and duct tape, and the knowledge, acquired not in a classroom or a lab but in a ditch in Oklahoma City in the dark, that a sealed volume of still air is the most efficient insulator available to a human body, and that all warmth is, in the end, a question of what you are willing to contain. If this story stayed with you, drop a like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments which part hit hardest, and where in the world you're reading this from.
Darwin Conaway had no degree, low lab, low funding. She had a $15 thermometer, a notebook from $3, and a day-rate pie in Oklahoma City. For 2 winters, she did what no engineer has to do. She lives inside the bloom. She sells the crow out with service from a Pluto. She record temperature at midnight when it was 9 degrees outside. She featured out that a sleeping bag low has its illustration when you lie on it. She learns that a bottle of hot water vapor in a workshop bright you for hour of warmth. Zero is slow down, not slowing if anyone would ever reach it. Someone did her data was real, her methodology was fried. Her finding was something year of simulation, ERAM office of it have never brought you. He was David's story teacher us intelligence is not a credential. It's attention applied to a problem with everything you have. Poverty does not make people less capable. It makes them invisible to the system. That is the most and the most dangerous thing we do as individuals, as community, and individual. You look at someone suffering and assume they have nothing to this Devin was never waiting to be killed, she was waiting to be seen. That is the only thing any of us ever need.